Hey guys, David Pingree with Vital MX, and we are here at State Fair MX today, kicking off the Vital MX Shootout of the 2021 450 motocross models. And we've got an interesting batch today of bikes, a great group of test riders. Obviously the Honda has seen the most changes for this year, a lot of updates from the Kawasaki, minor refinements from the other bikes. So how are they going to stack up together? We're all excited to see. And as I mentioned, we've got a pretty wide variety of test riders, from more recreational guys to some ex-pros, Chad Pedersen, myself. So we'll get some good feedback for you. We're here today, which is a tighter, stickier track. Tomorrow we're gonna be at Glen Helen, much faster, a lot of elevation change, loose chatter. So I think we're gonna have a good feel of what these bikes will do in a multitude of conditions. This is the bikes we've got to test today. The Suzuki did not make it. They're not in the country yet. They hadn't had any changes, so we felt okay just letting them sit this one out. The Gas again didn't make it in just because we don't have any of those bikes in the country yet. So we figured the KTM and Husky were close enough representatives. We'll see how they do. But in the meantime, we're gonna go get geared up and get to it. Thank you guys for watching, and welcome to the 450 Shootout. All right, well, we've wrapped up our 2021 450 Shootout, and we decided to get together and just really go through all of our notes collectively and kind of share with you guys what each of us thought of each of the bikes. So 2 days, one at State Fair MX, which was super tight, sticky, overwatered, but it made for a really technical, tight track. And then today at Glen Helen, really fast, really rough, and just a very different juxtaposition from what we had yesterday. So a great way to feel the bikes, what they do in a tight, sticky type of track, and then today, the complete opposite. So I think we got a pretty good feel for it. I want to go through each bike kind of in no particular order here. We'll do it in alphabetical order. Let's start with the Honda. First of all, this bike was certainly the most hyped of all the bikes this year. An all-new look. Thing looks sexy just looking at it. There was some negative feedback at the introduction of this thing. It had a little low RPM gurgle with the mapping. For me, it has all of these components to be really great. Good engine, it turns really well, it's comfortable to sit on, but I really struggled with suspension setup. I mean, for an hour today, we went through going stiffer, going softer, more sag, less sag, and I just could not get a nice plush initial with a good progression. It just had a firm spot to me always. Corey, what about you?
So I actually put Honda pretty high up on my list today. It was one of those bikes you could get on tired and still feel like a hero on the track, to me at least. I started on the soft side of it, more soft in the front so much than the rear, and which is kind of backwards to the conditions on the track today, but it helped me really take that new bike and dive it into the ruts. And the entry to the mid on that on that bike was super nimble to me. It had a good skinny feel to it, and the power is what stuck out the most to me. From top to bottom, you could ride that all the way around the track, and I rode the mellow the whole time, and I did ride the aggressive once and the mellow once. At Glen Helen, riding that mellow just wasn't enough. Now, it would be a good kind of starting point, but as far as the aggressive versus the kind of middle map, the middle map to me was the best for today's conditions, because we were riding through chop, braking bumps, deep ruts, and it had that power range to where if you accidentally gave it too much, it wasn't jumping out from underneath your feet.
I noticed every time I go out on it, especially in my feet, I felt a lot of vibration. Just something I noted.
Yeah, for me, the Honda, it's funny. One thing I picked up was for the last 10 years, I feel like the four-stroke Honda has had a very similar vibration in that motor, and I don't know what it is that does it, but the second that I got on it, it felt like a Honda to me. Some of the other bikes had more than others, and Honda to me was kind of midpoint. It vibrated, but it wasn't anything that I couldn't put up with.
What about you, Siebes? What was your thoughts?
So I actually just have been riding the 2020 Honda a lot, so I have like a really good comparison from the last model to this model. Getting on it from the 2020, it's way more narrower, just sitting on it in between your legs. It turns in a lot easier. The other one kind of has, you really have to throw the weight of the bike into the corner. The on-off of the throttle is much smoother on this one. I almost want to say the power is kind of KTM-like, where it builds very smooth, but there's a ton of power there, but where the 2020 was like an instant aggressive punch of a power. So you really always had to be kind of fresh and on your toes on it. Also the hooks in the rut at State Fair. The stroke speed, both front and the rear, seemed really fast on the Honda. Like it wouldn't compress and progressively get stiffer through the stroke. It would just drop to the bottom of the stroke. And then when you get on the gas, it would, kind of lift you up.
Well, and chatting with the Honda guys today too, they did mention that the pre-production bikes did have a softer valving setup, kind of what they came up with in Japan. And somewhere between there and production, which this happens occasionally, they went with a stiffer setting. And maybe that was the mistake, because if it's too soft, you're gonna have guys complain, but with this bike, I feel like, I don't care what you weigh, it doesn't really work that great.
I really liked the rider triangle in it. I thought that was super cool. It fit me really good. Today, we did some tweaks to the suspension, me and the Honda guys did, and we did a little bit more, and that thing was point and shoot for me today.
You loved it today?
Yeah, it was, the ruts were kind of blown out, but I mean, it was like a national out there today, but honestly, I could put it in a rut and it would carve through it, and it was the only bike that really, I felt kept pulling me up those hills. Like, me being a bigger guy, I was like, damn, this motor works really good.
Yeah, it does have motor. Well, maybe this speaks to, maybe it is valve stiffer, because someone like you, if you went out and liked it, and what are you, 210?
210-ish, yeah. I was on the aggressive map too, so I tried all the maps, and the aggressive one was my favorite at State Fair. I think it's gonna make you work a little harder.
Yeah, it's a little more exciting, and I noticed that little kind of rich feel down way low in the standard map would clean up when I went to the aggressive map. For sure. It was still there if you were really low RPM, but it's not super noticeable on the track in that aggressive map. All right, let's move to the Husky. This bike gets a lot of heat, or KTM does anyway, for just being like a white KTM, but I think all of us, having chatted a little bit before this, came to the realization that the subtle changes between the two, the swing arm, the muffler's different, the mapping's different, the suspension's 15 mil lower than the KTM, the subframe's different, I think the seat is lower as well. So there's definitely some subtle differences, and on the track, they feel like two different bikes. Let's start with you and we'll come back this way.
Agree 100%. You can't call the Husky a white KTM anymore. They don't feel anything alike at all. Like, I'm talking from top to bottom. Even like the rider triangle felt different on those things. The motors work similar, but for some reason, the KTM today could pull me up those hills, and I had to shift on the Husky. And they were both on the aggressive maps. I tried traction control, it didn't really work today. It worked better at State Fair, I thought, the traction control did, but I still didn't really care for it. So I would have to do a lot of setup on the bike to make it work for me. It really felt kind of like, almost like I was sitting in it instead of on it. Like it sat lower for me, and it did want to turn, but the problem is I would get it to turn, and as soon as I would get it to set on the berm, the front end would come up. So it was like I was almost fighting it every single, and the ruts were kind of G'd out at the back, so you guys obviously noticed that, but I just couldn't get it to comfortably balance for me, I should say.
State Fair yesterday had a big problem with that bike, the Husky, climbing out of corners, like I guess, you just mentioned that, Justin. Come in and just be like the light, or the front end felt really light and would just climb out. And so I went back there and did some adjustments, and it didn't feel that powerful to come out of those tight corners going into some of the jumps. Today, just riding a little faster, I think it felt more powerful to me at Glen Helen. But just like if you're in a taller gear, is pretty like weak pull. Overall, I just felt like it was a tough one to feel comfortable on. It was challenging to settle in because I was just so nervous, and I think it was a lot to do with the chassis setup or suspension.
Yeah, so kind of the first things that stood out to me on the Husky, as Justin said, was the engine vibration. The second that I started it, that was what I noticed right off the bat. That the engine and the chassis had a lot of vibration to them, but when I got it on the track, it's one of those things you kind of just forget about. But nonetheless, out of all the bikes, it had the most to me. And I've kind of learned that I like to, it's odd, as a tall guy, I like to set up my bikes a little bit lower. So the low feel of that bike was kind of natural to me, and at State Fair, it felt great. I actually felt right at home on it. And I think some riders will feel that way. Now, as you progress through, today, it was kind of the opposite. It kind of danced around, it had a little bit of a nervous feel to it. And then another thing that really stuck out was I feel that the saddle of that bike had the most curvature to it. So not only was it a little bit lower, but when you sat in it, you sat lower right off the bat. Yeah, had more of a pocket to it. Yeah, whereas a lot of the other bikes are a little bit taller, a little bit firmer seat foam, and you kind of feel like you're up and over the bike instead of sitting into it. So that's kind of where I felt as far as the ergonomics went. The motor at State Fair, There was that one double off to the far end of it where if you go inside, you actually kind of have to give it a good boost to get over it. I seat bounced it a couple times and came up short. So it took a lot of work to do it. But on the other bikes, if I went inside, it didn't take as much on that Husky, or as that Husky. Overall, yeah, it kind of, like we were saying, if it had a narrow feel to it, a kind of small cockpit, a little bit crammed, but it's one of those bikes that's just kind of easy to get on, easy to ride, but it's a little bit underwhelming.
One thing that we did do too is whatever order we rode the bikes in day one, we reversed that for day two. So I went on the Husky at the end of the day on day one, where the track was pretty beat up, and at least there was good traction and there was good berms to bank off of, so I could make that firm feeling work. And then when we got to Glen Helen today, I was out there first on that thing and it was smooth, so I wasn't really having to deal with the big bumps, like, because they got obviously pretty gnarly at the end of the day. But for me, I noticed kind of the same things you guys talked about. Firmer feel to the suspension, so almost like, I didn't mind that the whole thing was lower, but I need that, I can't have that initial softness go away. I need that for the little bumps and the chatter, and for it to kind of settle into turns. The motor was way more mellow. Because I went right from the KTM to the Husky, and today right from the Husky to the KTM, and it's not like it's slow, it's just definitely a tick off of what the KTM is. Well, moving on, the Cowie. I'll start. For me, the Cowie was the most comfortable bike, just overall. We get on it and everything from the brake lever and clutch lever, they were like real thin. And I feel like your fingers would kind of tuck around them real nice. It just is very comfortable. Not the most impressive on the dyno, but man, that motor is just, for me, was really usable. I never felt like it spins up too quickly. It doesn't go flat. It's got good roll on, good torque down low. Kind of anywhere I wanted it was there, and it was just very usable and friendly. The suspension to me was amazing. I could come into turns that were super choppy, and I rode it last at Glen Helen. I was the most comfortable on that bike at the very end of the day. Just gobbled up the bumps, drops into lines really good, holds a line, holds a carve around a turn. I had zero complaints. I came in and told Chavez, I'm like, I don't want to change anything. We didn't touch a clicker. I know some guys think the fork's a little soft. The way I tend to ride, for me, I liked it. I just softened the rear up to match it and balance it, and it was money. Super, super stable in a straight line. That's a real big point for me, is if I'm hauling ass, I need to know it's not gonna start dancing around on me. Like, it's just, that makes or breaks a bike to me. And on that Cowie, I never questioned that it was gonna step out or get head shake, or it was just very, very predictable, which made me be able to relax and just look for lines and ride. And the motor was mellow but super usable. So that was my take. Let's start with you again. What do you think?
So the Kawasaki was one of those bikes that you get on and it just felt like home. It is a little bit bigger of a bike, and I'm a little bit taller of a guy, so that felt great. I had to actually kind of stiffen up the forks, but soften the shock to get it where I wanted as far as the suspension went. But once we did that, I asked for nothing else. And I rode it twice each day. And I put a lot of time on that bike because it felt so great. I wanted to make sure, like, is this just me having energy or what's the deal here? So I rode it at the end of the day again today when I was exhausted, and it still felt great. And it, like you said, I think you nailed it. It's very predictable. At the end of the day today, Glen Helen, they were watering some sections that didn't need water by any means and had really, really big braking bumps and chatter in them. And a couple times on some other bikes, I would get a little out of control, if you will, and I really had to react. Whereas with the Cowie, it just kind of danced underneath my legs, and I could keep it planning and keep it going and keep looking forward instead of the, oh crap, let's hang on to this thing. One thing I think they need to catch up on, and this really isn't a big deal, but it's one thing on the Yamaha that I like, is the ability to change your mapping so easily and on the fly and check out your phone. One thing you have to do to change your mapping on the Cowie is actually change out your little plugs, if you will. Otherwise, that bike was great.
Yeah, the Cowie was a really good bike. I could put that thing into the rut and I could follow that thing all the way out and just stay on the gas. No wheel, coming out on me or nothing like that. No matter if it's slick or dry, it was very, very usable.
Like you said, it's extremely usable power. Even with the aggressive mapping, it's the off throttle to that crack of the on. It's not violent. So it still makes even the aggressive plug very manageable. The chassis was very balanced. I never got like the pitching of some of the other bikes. So the chassis was great. It was extremely balanced. There's a ton of grip. No head shake, driving, nothing going into corners. I mean, front to back, top to bottom, other than the brake lever. I love the bike.
And we never really talked about the clutch much. That was obviously a big change this year. Hydraulic clutch, going to the plate instead of the springs.
I feel like their clutch is the most, while being a hydraulic clutch, it's the most cable feel of a clutch, like how it engages and disengages. It's not on and off. There's still a lot of feed into the clutch.
And I almost think that's a compliment to the Cowie engineers, because I don't even mention it because I didn't even really notice it. It feels like a cable to me, which I like.
Right.
I like having that feed, whether I'm, if I'm braking really hard, I want to just kind of halfway engage it, or just a nice slip coming out of a turn. It's not that old hydraulic clutch feel, which used to be just light switch. The fact that we didn't mention it is I think a good thing, and no fade. Obviously no need to adjust the clutch. So. Okay, moving along, let's talk about the KTM.
The Cowie and the KTM were like neck and neck for me. Like those two bikes felt so much alike. But once we got, like I said, there was like a little bit of a chatter kind of a feel going into my turns on like the chop. So Glenhelen didn't have that obviously today, because it was more like you're like jumping into your corners, you know what I mean? It worked better today than yesterday for me, and I it was at the top yesterday for me as well. So it was really close between KTM and Cowie for me. The bikes felt really, really close, like identical almost, motor-wise and everything.
The nice thing about that KTM is with the fork, you can adjust air pressure and get the right spring rate for you, and then kind of compensate with the shock and cover a really wide range of weights.
Well, KTM was the overall package for me. It was just comfortable right away. It stayed in the turns nicely. It was just nimble. It's so fun to be on a new bike. Just so tight, everything just like feels amazing. Front brake was crazy good. It was smooth on the rear for me. It was just never had any problems. Like some bikes, I could stomp on the rear, maybe a little late, and it would just let just lock up and let loose. This thing kind of just had a better feel. Today at Glenhelen, it tracked really well at high speed going on Talladega. Really balanced overall feeling. It just felt like I could stay in the rut line well and just like go in and just finish coming out. I think the biggest thing is just how easy it felt, through the chatter, and just how comfortable I was on it, where you have that like comfortable feeling, you're a little more confident, and you can go push a little harder.
Well, and I think I always say this to people, like buying one bike or the other, you're not going to be able to go any faster. Whatever your speed or your skill level is, there's a ceiling there for you, and that's it. To me, it's just what bike is going to let you go that speed with the most comfort. And I found the same thing on the KTM, just high speed stability for me, which I loved. No matter how rough it got, the thing would just track really well. But nice, plush, supple initial, so the chatter coming into turns, or even if they got bigger, it would gobble the initial up and stay balanced over the bigger stuff, to where I could focus on the apex of the turn, or getting into a rut or whatever. It was real easy for me. So for me on the KTM, I really liked map 2, which was the aggressive map with the traction control. Like, I know you said you don't like it, but I found that anytime, especially today, if I did get on it too hard and it did step out, it just sort of corrected it for me and limited my mistakes. But I found the same thing you guys did. Just it carves the line really nice. It's stable at speed, great brakes, and the motor is insane. I think I'd give it probably the best engine of all of the bikes, because it's just instantaneous throttle response, but it's so smooth. It's plenty of torque. Somebody was saying they ran third gear like the whole track was easy. Yeah. You literally don't have to shift the damn thing if you don't want to, but it's just this super linear broad power that's good everywhere. It was really impressive. And it made, and I think we found this in the Yamaha, which we'll talk about next, but the more horsepower, the more aggressively the bike tries to put horsepower down, the harder it is to get it to handle. And I think that's what helps the KTM, is there's plenty of power, but it just makes it very smoothly. So it doesn't ever really upset the chassis and get it moving, you know what I mean? So yeah, good all around for me. I didn't have a lot of complaints about that bike. So okay, so let's finish up here with the Yamaha. Corey, what do you think?
I struggled both days with the Yamaha, and I had big expectations with how well it did last year. So I went in really kind of expecting a lot. Now, where it exceeded my expectations was the power. But to me, that wasn't so much of a good thing, because it was a lot to handle. And I rode it through the different maps that they offered, and it was a lot of power on each end. Let's say that we went to the aggressive map. It was too much for me. I would get into a tight rutted corner, and it would want to jump out from underneath my feet. To me, it was very difficult to manage that power. nonetheless, you have all the power in the world that you want there. It's up to you to manage it. Another thing that kind of stuck out to me was the bike just felt very top heavy and big and long. We changed bar positions on it, which helped a lot. First day I felt like I was riding over the front of the bike. We moved the bars back on the clamps, which stock is a great thing to have. You can adapt it pretty easily. Anyways, moved it back and I felt better on it. But even getting deeper into the corners, the tank had a wide feel to it. So it didn't have that nimble, throw it wherever you wanted it feel to me. I had to kind of really aggressively kind of take that top weight, push it down into the corners and pull it back up to exit it out. And there were even times where it would stand me up coming back out. Granted, it had great power. I really like the accessibility into your maps, into tuning it. The app is awesome, but it took a lot of work for me today, or a lot of work for me to get comfortable on it.
Yamaha was very good, both places. I felt really comfortable. I can get in and out of the corners. The power it got a little bit hard for me to get used to because I didn't know if I wanted to rev it out or if I wanted to shift it. And it's like the more I rode it, I'd rev it out a little bit farther, which would kind of help me out a little bit through the bumps instead of trying to ride through the not so good of the power. But once I figured that out, everything just worked really great.
Just rev it a little bit.
Yeah, I just rev it just a little bit more instead of trying to ride it into the meat of the power. So once I got that figured out, and today it was just like every little rut that I wanted to go to, I could hit that rut and it would stick. It just seemed like it'd stick to the dirt when I cut back to the inside going across the ruts. I felt very comfortable on the bike. Everything it worked well, especially on the outdoor.
You were a fan both days.
Yeah.
For me, I think that Yamaha, maybe I guess the issue I have with the Yamaha is like we talked about comfort and being just comfortable and confident knowing that it's not going to do anything weird at speed. I didn't have that with the Yamaha. I felt like if I hit a bump wrong or catch it funny, it's going to do something. And so I could never really relax with it. And it's weird because the suspension's amazing. I feel like the KYB stuff works great. The action is really good. If you're in a straight line, whether it's gobbling up bumps or accelerating, it's really good. For me, it was kind of sweepy stuff. So Glen Helen, it really kicked my ass. I mean, those turns where you're sweeping in, there's low traction, huge bumps. That was a struggle for me today on that bike. Having said that, really good clutch feel, good brake feel. But I think that the power, they were just making so much horsepower with this engine. It's hard to make the chassis stay calm and be settled. You know, maybe it just comes on a little too hard, you know, if they would spread that thing out. And they did have a map, they call it the Magic Map. You'll be able to get that at Yamaha's website. That does help. I found that was helpful, but to me it's still too much. I couldn't, even on the mellowest map, I couldn't really utilize all the power. It was just, if I really got into it hard, man, it was a handful.
All right, so let's get to the results here after we tabulated everything up. Finishing in 5th position this year for the 2021 450 Shootout is going to be the Husqvarna with 30 points. Again, we kind of went over some of those things that got it there, some of the feeling the riders were having. 4th place this year, a bit of a surprise, is the Yamaha with 18 points. And again, these are very close here, as you'll see. Like in 3rd position is Honda with 17 points. These two are almost interchangeable in terms of feedback from riders, liking one over the other. The next day they'd like the other over that one. So very, very close between those two. Honda's 3rd with 17. The KTM finished 2nd with 14 points. Generally very well liked with everybody. Just a couple of odd comments here and there, but 14 points, a pretty solid 2nd place. And winning the 2021 Shootout for Vital MX here is a Kawasaki with 11 points. You know, if you start looking at the scores, a pretty clear-cut winner, but just the comments from everybody, it was a great all-around machine. Not a lot to complain about on that thing. A few things I want to just mention here as we button up. A lot of times the value here doesn't land in the overall ranking for you, right? Your riding style wouldn't gel with the Kawasaki, and it's better on the Yamaha or the Husky. That's okay. We're not saying don't buy those bikes. They're still great motorcycles. This is feedback from a handful of guys on 2 different tracks, and that's it. That's what I would tell you to look for, is the patterns in the notes, the patterns in the things that they're saying that are consistent. Because different body types, different weights, different skill levels, people like different feels. It's not cut and dry. So there's a lot of gray area and a lot of nuance in this. So look for the patterns in the notes. That's where the value lies. And I would always tell people as well, go somewhere where you've got a good, strong dealer that'll support you and buy one of his brands. That is worth way more than just picking what bike comes first or second on this. The support that you can get with service, parts, accessories, all of those things far outweighs a ranking in a shootout. That's our advice. This has been our 2021 450 shootout here for Vital MX. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you at our 250F shootout coming up soon.